So, well, thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, Tom. Glad to be on. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, look, it's an absolute pleasure. So let's just start off with a little bit about you then. So can you talk us through your journey to get to where you are today, and what inspired you to pursue a career in the biotech industry?
So I was born in Africa. That's important because I wanted to become a physician, and many of my family members are physicians, and we have a long history of that, both on my father's and my mother's side, and very much planned to be a physician. And as I went through school in Africa, decided my parents are Americans, wanted to come back to the U.S. And in my pre-med courses, I had a lot of interactions with the medical community, and it was very different. Uh, the being a physician in Africa, I think, was lagging what it was being in America. And so in America, you had HMOs telling you how much time you had to spend with patients, and it became very much a sort of a business. And that was not kind of what I wanted to do. And so I pivoted into biotechnology. My parents, both my parents were entrepreneurs, as well as my grandfather, and so it made sense to move into biotechnology or pharmaceuticals. And pharmaceuticals for me are strategically very rich area when you think about strategy for developing drugs, bringing them to the market, and then also the lever that you have to actually help people and actually do good and have some positive outcome out of your efforts is also very positive. So that's why I moved into biotech.
Very good. So your career has been deeply rooted in ophthalmology. What sparked your interest in the field, and how has it influenced your entrepreneurial ventures as well?
I think for me, ophthalmology is. I started out my career in cardiovascular, and then moved into specialty, which was I was on the launch team for Crixivan at Merck, and that was the first time I got introduced to sort of specialty pharmaceuticals, and that is I thought it was more biotech like, because you have small sales forces, small companies can go in and develop and market drugs. So that was the first sort of inkling that I wanted to be in that kind of market. I think when I had the great benefit of working with Dr. David Geyer as a consultant at iTech, and that was my first introduction into ophthalmology. And I think it's a very neat area because for a long time it's a very sleepy area, and all of the sort of established companies in those areas, Alcon, Allergan, great companies, but they very much did not bring a lot of innovation to those areas. And the innovation came from companies like Genentech, Merck at the time with Optics. So there was a lot of innovation, but it was coming from the outside. I also went to my first AAO, and I noticed that normally when you go to these conventions, if you go to the American Society of Hypertension, the booths are all pharmaceutical, and they take up the floor. At my first AAO, the pharmaceutical companies were in the back, and the device companies were in the front. And that to me seemed like a great opportunity. I think the other thing I like about ophthalmology is you can visualize the anatomy of the organ you're trying to affect. You can visualize the pathology, and then you can also visualize the effect you're having on that. So unlike, say renal or cardiac, you really can only go in and see what's happening to the tissues through biopsies and scans and things like that. But the anatomy of the eye is readily visible. I think the other thing that's very exciting about ophthalmology is that ophthalmologists themselves, if you think about the innovation curve, they're all the early adopters and innovators. They were always the top of their class, and so they're very smart people and very well educated, and they love innovation. So your uptake for innovative products is very quick.
Very good. So Claris emerged from stealth mode in 2024. Can you share the story behind its inception, the vision that drives the company, as well as a little bit on the pipeline as well?
So the technology itself comes from Scape and Zai Institute, from the labs of Dr. Reza Dana and Dr. Sunil Chauhan, and they have long been leaders in developing therapeutics and for the cornea and for the front of the eye. I had known Dr. Dana through earlier work at Lux Biosciences, and they had called me in because they had isolated what they thought was going to be a very interesting molecule. So they had been taking mesenchymal stem cells and placing them on the surface of the eye, and they saw a salubrious effect. But the problem was you can't place cells on the eye. There's no regulatory development path forward for that, at least one that's not easy. So what they did is they went in and silenced the elements in the secretome. And when they silenced HGF, that's when they saw the beneficial effects go away. And so they knew they had an active moiety there that could be very potent in healing, prevention of fibrosis, and acceleration of the the cells that were there. So in healing, but also for us, more importantly, limbal stem cells. So it actually promotes the promotion of the growth of those cells, but also stops the apoptosis of those cells. So it was kind of this Swiss Army knife. And then the question was, what indication do we first go into? And so we started the company based off of the idea of going to the surface of the eye and bringing HGF to those complex diseases in the front of the eye.
Good. Biotech has so many highs and lows. I guess Claris earlier in its journey faced negative clinical data that could have easily marked the end for such a young company. Yet under your leadership, the company pivoted and was able to find a new direction. Can you walk us through that moment, what the data revealed, how you processed it as a leader, and what ultimately led you to steer the company towards a different and successful path?
Yeah, so biotech is not unknown to failure, and that does happen. I think we had a rationale for why we went into NK and felt that we were going to see positive results. Often in biotechnology, the worst thing you can get is great results, and because then you don't know whether you can go forward or backward or what the problem is. We got definitive results. The drug did not work, and when we looked at every subset, we could not find a difference between vehicle and the drug. The first thing you do is you sort of have to absorb that. You've spent 2 years working, 4 years working on it, the team 2 years, and it's a big emotional blow. But once you get over that, if you have the right team, then you start getting down and breaking up the data and trying to find out what went wrong. And I think from a mechanistic perspective, we have a very good understanding of what went wrong. And basically, we were looking in our models at healthy eyes, and we were treating unhealthy eyes. So some of the signals, some of the neuropeptides that we needed were not present in those eyes. So we didn't see an effect. So then really after that, you said, well, what do we do next? I think that's too late. If that's where, if after you've gotten the negative data, you're thinking about where you're going to go next, it's too late. So I think we always in biotechnology, I believe in preparing for calamity at a company scale, and then also in all the various disciplines, be it CMC or preclinical. You're always thinking, what could go wrong? What's our plan B? What's our plan C? What's our plan D? So the basis of surviving any of these things is having a good team, and you have people who you trust each other. You have lots of experience. You've seen these things before, and you're dedicated to what you're doing, the molecule, the people, the company, your investors. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to plan for that failure. So we did have extra money in the bank. We had formulated drugs so that we could continue doing studies and other indications. We had listened to our investigators. So during the conduct of the NK trial, we had physicians who were saying they were seeing potentially a benefit in NK, but they were also seeing a benefit in the patients who had concomitant limbal stem cell deficiency and NK. And when we heard that, and we heard it from enough physicians in the study, we decided to start another proof of concept trial. And so as we got the negative NK data, we'd already been enrolling, and we're seeing positive data from that. We also, from our preclinical work, knew that we could prevent scarring and reverse scarring. So we had another POC. So we had two POCs going in parallel at the same time. So we had money, we had drug, we can continue doing our POCs. We had developed a good rapport with our investors, and they wanted to support us as we move forward and see what that data would be, and 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 allow that data to mature. And they did, and that's why we're where we are right now, and very very happy with the data we're seeing in both POC trials.
Yeah, for sure. Some journey the company's been through, right? You talk about highs and lows in biotech. That probably summarized it in a nutshell.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, Good. And so raising capital in today's biotech market is notoriously challenging. I know Claris Bio are working towards a Series B round after an impressive A round. How are you navigating these difficult conditions? What's been your strategy in communicating value to investors, the story, and what gives you confidence that now is the right time to go out and scale?
To answer the last question, the right time to go out and raise money is always now. There's no there's no better time. So I think that's the answer to that question. I think when it comes to conveying the value, I think what we do have is even in the trial with NK, what we were able to de-risk in that trial was our safety profile. Our safety profile is outstanding. We actually saw in the patients who had any sort of AE that was related to inflammation, we actually saw much lower numbers in the active group, and that fits with our mechanism of action. We're an immunomodulatory agent, so we have an excellent safety profile. We saw a hint of our activity in the safety data. We've de-risked the formulation. The formulation is safe. Unlike most biologics, we have a very stable protein. And so our formulation can be in the patient's hands at room temperature. So that's another benefit for biologic, especially for something that might be used chronically. We've developed our CMC, so we have a new process. So we've taken a lot of risk out of the system. We are late stage, and so there are not a lot of late stage assets out there. And we could see top line data in 2027. We could have an approval in 2028. So there is the ability to launch this or see the data at least pretty soon. We're also unique in the sense that there are not a lot of areas where a biotech can go forward and be successful in launching a drug. There's a lot of risk around that, but we've seen a lot of companies, Tarsus, Dompe. We've seen a lot of these companies be very successful in launching products, and so I think that is also a path that's amenable to us. So it de-risks us from, do we have to do an IPO? Do we have to do an M&A? No, there's a viable third path for us. So I think all of that sort of de-risks it. Ultimately, I think it comes to the data, and we're seeing a very robust signal, especially in limbal stem cell deficiency. We're seeing, 50% of our patients have a 15-letter gain, um, at least a 15-letter gain, and the rest that are behind them are very close. So even though those that we have some people we describe as partial responders, and they're seeing 10, 12, 11-letter gains. So if you compare that to AMD, what you would expect in an AMD trial would be, maybe 30% of patients would reach that level. So we're seeing a robust signal there. So I think that helps a lot with the data, and all of the elements of our data sort of line up together. When we take the patient off the drug, their visual acuity comes down. When we put them back on the drug, their visual acuity goes back up. So we're seeing that dose effect, and the patients continue to get better the longer they're on the drug. So I think all of those elements really help
Yeah,
in
for
raising
sure.
money.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. There's a famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, especially, I guess that's more so true in early stage biotechs where uncertainty is high and teams are much smaller. How have you approached building a strong culture at Claris? And how has that culture helped the company stay focused and resilient through scientific and difficult market conditions at the moment?
Um, yeah, so I completely agree with that statement that culture will eat strategy for lunch. I completely agree. I think and you kind of pointed to it. One of the benefits of biotech is, especially a startup, is you get to build your team from the ground up. So the people you bring in, I've had the great fortune of working with Susan. I've had the great fortune of working with Piotr. I've had the great fortune of working now recently with Tommy and with Henry, our chief business officer. So you can bring in people that are like-minded, people who behave the same way. Often say you don't want to bring any cannibals into the canoe because you're going to be out in the ocean for maybe 5 years and people get hungry. So I think it always starts with the people, people who are thoughtful, people who have a lot of integrity, people who are dedicated to the mission or to the objective. And I think it's also important to set that objective. And I think always I learned this from Merck and I've carried this through my career. If you put the patient first, it makes all the other decisions easier, or at least maybe not easier, but it gives you a direct line to what you're targeting and what you're aiming for. And so it does require many times when you put the patient first, it's not something you want to do. It's not the easy thing to do. Sometimes you have to make some difficult decisions. Sometimes you have to change course a little bit. And I think that brings out the sort of honesty, integrity, courage in those people. So I think that people who are action oriented, I think those are the kind of people you're looking for. And I think then the other thing I think is really important in the culture is transparency and allowing everybody to contribute. And I think that's super important in biotech and pharmaceuticals because everybody's there for a reason, right? These are multidisciplinary teams. There's preclinical, there's tox, there's safety, there's clinical, there's CMC. You have all these different pieces, and if you don't allow and provide for a space for everybody to speak openly and freely, then you lose that, and that's where the culture will kill any strategy. And I think the other important thing is in that environment that you give credit for everybody's idea there. I think there's a lot of cultures where somebody takes credit for everything that goes on that's beneficial, and I think attribution is very, very important. We do it in referencing documents and scientific articles. We should do it for ideas as well. And then the last piece is I think the CEO needs to get out of the way. I think often I find I'm a recovering micromanager. I think Zoom meetings and not being in an office have been very helpful. We're a team that has a lot of experience, so we don't need to be micromanaged. And I think the less you sort of nudge and poke on the team and only come in if there's a problem and if you're invited, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I think whenever I ask that question to people, you could have the best tech, the best science, the best team, whatever, but it's always people that it comes down to at the end of the day. And yeah, completely know where you're coming from with that. And this is a question we always finish with on the BioHub. I know I wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on this question, but if you were to have dinner with 3 people, past or present, who would they be and why? Don't necessarily need to be biotech innovators, although they can be if you like. But yeah, 3 people for dinner.
I think so. I did think about this. Thank you for giving me a heads up that you were going to ask this question. I think for me, I would just love to see my father and grandfather again. And I think that they were such interesting men. They were also very intellectually curious, loved history, loved science. So I think putting them together and then inviting somebody that we don't know, but would be interesting for the conversation. A Mark Twain, a Jules Verne, somebody famous in history, a Napoleon. We'd need a translator, but somebody like that I think would be kind of keen. But mostly just to see my father and my grandfather again.
Yeah. Good. Well, I love those answers. And yeah, I think thanks so much for helping us out with this. I think you've given a really unique perspective on ophthalmology, like Claris's progress as well, and certainly a company I'm going to be following a lot more for sure. So sounds exciting what you're building, and thanks again for helping us out with this.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the invitation.